voulez. Bonsoir à tous. Un plaisir comme toujours. On change en anglais. Good evening. Oh my goodness, we already have fuckery with our OBS. We switched over. I might have mentioned that yesterday. We're 100% Mac again, and it's been a lot of years since that's happened. A long story why we're 100% Mac, but reconfiguring all this stuff is kind of complicated and not so fun. Last night, today I woke up. It's been a kind of a shitty day as usual, but strangely, I did have, there is some good things that happened today and some good news that I hope to share with you. And I did in upcoming days, weeks, months, etc., by now, if you are one of our very few people that watches us from time to time, you know that it's very difficult for us to do these kind of things right now. It's 2:15, but you know, well, whatever. If you want to do this, you have to do it. So, you know, you're not going to get caviar and oysters on a plate at 6:15 with, you know, 10 helpers doing makeup. If you want to do it, don't complain. So we will not complain about anything. I did notice that last night with the completely random podcast we did get some viewers. So as always, we appreciate anyone who wastes their time to watch us, and we hope that we do say something that could be useful. It just takes just a little tiniest thing. It might be something which you can pick up and move on and develop it probably much better than us. I also noticed that last night it seems like I did drink a few too many Cuba Libres, so if I seemed like completely how can we say, cooked, that may have been possible. However, as they said in Apocalypse Now, if that was indeed the fact, I would not be disposed to discuss about that. So I hope we were minimally coherent. This evening I have to do things really quickly. Busy day tomorrow. And just a quick stupid thing. We can see, I think I've got Google here. Our thumbnail should show a nice belle huey Iroquois, en français, Iroquois helicopter, the famous Hueys from Vietnam. Apparently, nowadays, I've been away, I repeat, for a couple of weeks in South America. But I came back, and apparently the main Discord, what was it called, Midjourney, is no longer number one, and Flux AI is now the top image viewer. So that helicopter was done with Flux and there's some front end websites, and then you also have like a free uncensored free source app you can download, but we are not going to get into that very quickly. I came across this today, and before getting back into the book from yesterday, which I kind of got a little bit out of control, but wanted to just hammer away and to this point, because everyone, times have changed. Right now we're in 2024, but so many people, is Deleuze a realist, is Deleuze a metaphysician? Deleuze told everyone he was a metaphysician forever, but everything Deleuze and Guattari are talking about is absolutely 100% concrete. And that's why I appreciate this essay, which is very rare, where Hermqn Rapaport talks about the Thousand Plateaus of Vietnam, and it's the concreteness of everything here that interests me. And obviously, at the same time, in parallel, we have virtual forces underlying the concrete, but I'm sure any good Deleuzian would know this, and I'm going to show you very quickly right now because we're kind of streaming, it's informal. This has nothing to do with anything, but I found an old video just by chance of Slavoj Žižek. This is many years ago, I'm guessing 10 or 15 years ago, who somehow managed to, I'm not sure how OBS is working here, but get an interview with Bernie Sanders. And I'm guessing we're 10 to 15 years back where Slavoj was in his full Maoist, Alain Badiou obviously is the only great Maoist, but his full Stalinist persona, and he was kind of still has a heavy degree of Slovenian irony when he interviews Bernie Sanders. And, Slavoj is obviously at the top of his game playing his character. And one of the big problems I have with him today is that, that's kind of complicated. But he doesn't have, he was kind of like, what's the guy's name? Sacha Baron Cohen, no? The English comedian that did Ali G, Borat, he would interview people, and then there was just this whole kind of total irony of the situation, a joke that the interviewee had absolutely no idea about. And I think that Žižek, at this point, this was one of his better moments. And it's interesting to note, let's watch it right now, that Bernie Sanders has absolutely no clue about what Žižek is saying here. So let's go on with this.
Stalin. He said he respected the American dynamic, pragmatic spirit.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
So don't be ashamed, even intellectually, to be Americans.
Well, come on. Of course not. Look, you're right. This country does a lot that we should be very, very proud of and build on.
Yeah.
But there are a number of countries around the world that we can learn from.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Most countries are much worse than United States.
Well, I don't think so. I honestly don't.
Well, I'm very misanthropic, I think that most of the people are boring, stupid, and so on. But here I have absolutely all the freedom to do whatever I want.
Well, let me tell you what I believe. You can determine, what we mean by it, okay?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. The problems we face are enormous. If we are going to prevent this country from sliding into oligarchy.
The oligarchy, yeah.
People on top are doing phenomenally well. Most others are not. Let
me add something to this. We all saw James Cameron's Titanic, right?
Yeah.
Remember, the rich, spoiled girl is in a life crisis, and the function of Leonardo DiCaprio is to bring some of the lower class vitality to restore her ego, and then after doing this, he can disappear. It's a little bit like E.T. goes home, but he goes down. Let me be clear. I am proud to be here, and I hope I at least made you start thinking.
Well, let me tell you something. I think what we want to do is build on our strengths, which are many, to deal with the issue of more equality and try to figure out how we make it better. But the point is...
The important thing is not to engage in some crazy, destructive experiments, but to open up the space of thinking.
Okay.
I hope you and other intelligent people also know this.
Okay, let me see if I can turn this off here. So Let's see. Okay, it's gone. So Slavoj has done his Sasha Baron. I can't remember anymore. Moment. He's done his Borat, and Bernie Sanders is obviously frustrated. He doesn't want to go on anymore, and but it's just kind of. It's funny. Sanders is a politician. He obviously understands, nothing about Marxism, Karl Marx, communism, absolutely zero. And here I have to agree 100% with Zizek. I mean, the role of Sanders, who is now ancient history, should have been to open up, and there were some small movements with students, but it should have been to open up the horizon of possibilities within a pure capitalistic system, of possibilities of equality in a system where the state does not control all production. So I still find it ironic today, because if I go around on YouTube, everyone is saying that the big threat to the United States is Marxism, and that, the Marxists, immigration, Marxists, this, that, and the other. But these are people that have absolutely no clue about Marxism. And I don't know who said it, but I saw it the other day, and they said, if anything, and it's true, 100%, the United States, the real risk is fascism, because fascism, by definition, is the merger of a central controlling government with independent private corporations. Communism is, by definition, a government where the government controls all means of production. And I've said this before, and I do not want to, I'm not a Stalinist, I'm not a Maoist. I mean, that would be absolutely crazy, in my opinion, to do like Badiou or Zizek and, say, I'm a Stalinist, I'm a Maoist, like, that's so cool. But, the whole, in the case of Stalin, not so different with Mao, is so different because Stalin's problem was he wanted to go all the way and do what Marx said and put all of Russia, all of production, all industrial and agricultural production, everything under control of the state. And Stalin, like I've said before, he did it really quickly in all the big cities in Russia. It was easy. He took over all of the means of production, were in control. But Russia is a massive, massive, huge country with very large variations of populations. Kazakhstan, Dagestan, Georgia, Vladivostok, you go all the way to the Orient. That is massive. Siberia, massive, massive amounts of territories. And how, that was Stalin's problem, was how do you take control of such a vast amount of territory and put it under the control of the state? Simple problem. As we all know, the solution by Stalin was very, very bloody and very ugly, as we all know. And so I repeat, in no terms am I going to say I'm a Stalinist, but we have to remember that everything has their concepts, ideas, their execution of things, jurisprudence. People in history have their particular problems which are relative to their geography, to their territory. That's also a point of this book on Vietnam. So I always kind of freak out a little bit when I go on YouTube with the news and they're like, the Marxists this, the Marxists that. And I'm like, man, you don't even know like anything about Marx. It's like you're kind of equating Marx to multiculturalism or something like that, which for me is perfect. Fine. No problems with that. And I hope, my hope is, and I'm losing all my time here, that we can go from Vietnam to the conflict in Bosnia in the 1990s, because I recently watched court métrage by Jean-Luc Godard, which is the famous movie director. If you don't know him, hopefully you do, which is called Je vous salue Sarajevo, and an accompanying text he wrote, which I think, just like this text, is so relevant today. That it was done in 1992. And I hope in or an upcoming streaming or whatever, we could dedicate some time to reading this text. And it's almost as if that for the powers that be, for lack of a better word, that the multiculturalism is viewed by the people in power as a threat. No, it gets very complicated, because we know today we have mass immigration. I don't want to get lost in this subject, because I can easily shoot 2 hours like that, and I have to. But hopefully we'll get back to Jean-Luc Godard, Sarajevo, and not only Sarajevo, Mostar, and Srebrenica. My camera is doing an automatic zoom because it's AI, and if I move my fingers, it does whatever it wants. Can we zoom out? Zoom out a little further, please. Hello. Oh, thank you very much. So let's get back to our text on Vietnam, which still, I don't even remember where I left off, but I think this: in Balinese society, Bateson writes, there is a lack of climax in Balinese society. In general, the lack of climax is characteristic for Balinese music, drama, and other art forms. Could the same be said about the Viet Cong? That for them, the art of war is anticlimactic, just a movement. Derived, quote, from the logic of its formal structure and modifications of intensity determined by the duration and progress of the working out of these formal relations. So, and what we might say about the violence as interpreted in this framework: Balinese culture avoids quarrels. The Viet Cong avoid direct head-on contact, but at ambush, at the trap, they are devastating. And once again, I think this text is just written so well. I'm not going to try. I mean, you all get it, and I hope you purchase this and you do much more with this text than I can. A rifleman from the 1st Cavalry Division relates how his unit is moving into a valley and suddenly hears the VC, Viet Cong, talking through bullhorns. Kill GI, kill GI, and invisible speaking, and then suddenly mortar fire into the center of the unit, widening out so that the men cannot hold a perimeter, and the wounded GIs crying out, kill me, followed by misdirected ammo drops, which the enemy recovers and uses, followed by more wounded and terrified bystanders with empty clips, and still the steady rain of mortar fire. I always had a bad habit of being afraid of wounded guys. A wounded guy crying, I didn't know what to do. Paralysis, fragmentation, and then just blur. When the NVA, that's the North Vietnamese Army, made the rush, there was a lot of shooting. They shot all of our wounded and killed them. This is a quotation from a soldier from the war. During the course of the fighting, all the horror of people being wounded, parts of their body being blown off, became a blur. Typical of the army, one was always without ammo at such points, alone, terrified, impotent before the screaming of the enemy, which had caught one off guard, in a position which was not a position from which to encounter the enemy, a trap or deadly rhizome, without sides, bearings, directions, but only a disembodied violence, like being shot point blank. As the North Vietnamese rightly described their perception of the war during the first years of America's commitment to the struggle, it was the U.S. elite troops which took a brutal mauling at the hands of the communist guerrillas and regulars. I'm going to try and get a little bit closer to the microphone, so hopefully it'll be a little bit easier to understand. And yet, this mauling never occurred in the form of decisive battles. Okay? And I think you guys all know this by now. We're not in World War I where we're digging trenches in lines all over the place, and Europe is divided by lines everywhere, and you just conquer the interstitial territory between the drawn lines. This is not Napoleon, where we have a battlefield with the front line and, you know, your flank maneuvers and direct maneuvers, etc., etc. Here, in Vietnam, there were no front lines, and one of the worst enemies was boredom, that nothing would happen for days, and then in the jungle, in the heat, in the intensity of this plateau, which is continually in movement, which is an additional stress for the soldiers, you know, out of nowhere. You're going to walk into a place full of traps, and then the soldiers are going to lose limbs. And I think we'll get to this pretty quickly, and this is important. It's the concept in the Western world of the full body and the Oriental world of the partial body. So once again, a very, very concrete example of Deleuze and Guattari speaking about partial objects, for example, and we should get to that pretty quickly. So, and yet this mauling never occurred in the form of decisive battles. Truong Son of the NLF reports that the North Vietnamese took very much into account the American expectation that one ought to win decisive battles in Vietnam. Though somewhat disheartened, the Americans, obdurate by nature and possessed of substantial forces, still clung to the hope for a military solution, for decisive victories on the battlefield. Truong Son's comments are based on the perception that an American view of an all-or-nothing victory can easily be converted to a tactic by which the superior forces, anxious for a quick victory, are by way of certain fracturing reduced to something less than a victory. That is, the North Vietnamese immediately realized that a molecularization of its forces among those of the southern resistors would force the United States to spread its resources thin. So once again, I think a reader of Deleuze and Guattari, of Hermqn Plateau, we have molar and molecular. So here, the metaphor is direct. The American forces, which had absolutely no doubt about them, superior forces and superior power, were by nature forced into a molar strategy where the Viet Cong took on a completely molecular tactic. And molecular meaning, obviously, very small groups moving only at night, moving in silence, setting up traps everywhere, avoiding at all costs the climax. And this is where we get back to Gregory Bateson, no? The climax. It's Balinese music. Avoids a climax. It avoids a high point. It avoids, let's be honest, the orgasm. We're going to get into that very quickly. It's just a constant humming of intensity without any kind of climax. And this, for Westerners, is something absolutely foreign to the Western body without organs, to the Western body, to the Western mentality, whatever word we want to use. So, that is, the North Vietnamese immediately realized that a molecularization of its forces among those of the southern resistors would force the United States to spread its resources thin. Son's assessment of the American strategy is that it did not specifically center on anything, and that the Americans and their puppets had no definite way of utilizing their mobile and occupation forces. For this reason, even when conflict was head-on, that conflict would be articulated in terms of a certain passivity, since action did not necessarily lead to anything more than action itself. Once again, I'm sure you all get that. I mean, once action arrives and then you start shooting after weeks of suffering, the intensity of the heat and the fear of the enemy, the lack of water, everything, then someone starts shooting. But the shooting is almost inherently passive, because it only leads you to shooting, to action. There is no front line. There is no, we're going to conquer that village. There is no, we're going to take that mountain. No, it's just simply violence, war reduced to its most essential unit, that is action itself. And therefore, from a Western point of view, that is passive, because action has a purpose, a goal. But in Vietnam, this was not the case. Moreover, the communists saw to it that the corpse, so I'm doing that in English, the corpse, we said before, a military corpse. We could translate it as a military body. In French, obviously, corps, plural, would be bodies. Corps is a body, so same thing. Would be disarticulated along various mobile fronts, all at the same time. So once again, the Vietnamese communist tactics are to render the act of warfare to a certain passivity, in which you're just simply shooting. You have no clue what you're shooting at, why you're shooting, what your goal is. But at the same time, the Viet Cong or the MVL would carry this out on multiple fronts at the same time, and making things even more confused for Western soldiers. In doing so, they ensured that action would be reduced to random or marginalized events, which, even if successfully won by the Americans, would not mean victory. As so many soldiers said to themselves over and over again, what a waste. So, If people, there are a lot of wonderful films about in cinema regarding the Vietnam War, Apocalypse Now, one of the best, absolutely, but no, for the soldiers, you perpetually just have this sense of the absurdity of the waste of all of this. So it's getting late. I'm gonna just try and read very quickly the last paragraph and shut down. Hopefully tomorrow night I will be in conditions to go ahead. Talking to the microphone. For us, the violence and terror which occurred appeared illegitimate and ethically perverse. That sudden blitz out of nowhere and the mysterious dissolution of the enemy. It was a violence which we could not experience as violence, for nothing really felt like it engaged anything else. There's just catastrophe and then medevac. These various levels of experience, each more or less detached and disarticulated from the other. Obviously, the other is the Vietnamese soldiers. This constituted the Thousand Plateaus. I'm going to read that again. Very important. You do not feel like you're engaging anything. You are not in a traditional war. There's just catastrophe. You are in there, destroyed. Nothing happens. Boredom is destroying you. And then there's just explosions everywhere. And then you are wounded and you're being pulled out by a medevac, a helicopter. These various levels of experience, each more or less detached and disarticulated from the other, because there's no logical chain of events between one battle and the other. It's not like Napoleon. It's not like the Second World War. You know, in order to get to Berlin, we're going to have to take France and then Belgium and then Austria and then Sicily. No. In the plateau of Vietnam, there's no logical connection between battles. They just occur. They just happen according to the contingency of the moment, and this constitutes the Thousand Plateaus. My reading glasses really need to get replaced. Very quickly, it is the recognition that violence or combat is not part of a teleological experience, part of a personally coherent state of affairs in which events can be linked, explained, discussed, argued. For the word combat itself was made somewhat obsolete, since it suggests a relation, an active fighting with or against someone. In Vietnam, however, we either launched attacks or sustained them, at least in some regions, but there were no battles necessarily. Perhaps the tendency to mutilate corpses after a fight was merely an attempt by some of our people to recapture a sense of combat. But here again, there was only a certain passive frustration. The enemy was already dead, occupied another plateau, was cut off from the living. I'm just going to repeat that again because this passage I find very interesting. The enemy was already dead, occupied other plateaus, was cut off from the living. So once again, I'm going to sign off. I'm sure, 100% sure that those few, the brave that follow this, understand this all without my boring explanations, and I'm sure you understand it better than me. And we still have about 10 pages or so, and I'm going to try and go ahead day by day and get through this because we have to move forward and be optimistic. Otherwise, what are we going to do? And I would encourage you, if you have time, to check out, to follow us here. Not because I want followers, not because, only because we're going to get into passages where we get into some of the most interesting things for me are about the libidinal and technology and how the weapons and the arms used in Vietnam by the Vietnamese and the Americans from a libidinal point of view. Libidinal, we'll get to a formal definition, but we're talking about psychological, sexual, libidinal relations to weapons. And I think all of this is and to technology itself, to this pure mobility that the American soldier had, to the fact that the American soldier was transformed into a nomad, not because he wished to be a nomad, but because the technology demanded that of him, meaning that the development of helicopters and radio communications, which eventually is the base for internet, WhatsApp, all of the shit we're dealing with today. Bad word, excuse my French. But it's this pure mobility on top of this, immense plateau composed of various plateaus, but always a movement and always being articulated and disarticulated, and this state of pure intensity with no climax, with no chance of victory. Just this for me, this book captures, in my opinion, in a perfectly practical way, the concept of the plateau by Deleuze and Guattari. And once we get to the stuff on technology, on libidinal investment into technology, into music, into rock and roll, the fact that for the American soldiers, Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, they was used as a means of opening the trigger to open this libidinal state of killing, these are all questions which this essay, I think you can find all kinds of information, which isn't just helpful, for understanding the Deleuze and Guattari, if in fact that's what you're interested in, but also relates to so many things that are going on today. Obviously, in 1970s, 50 years later, a little more than 50 years later, but the concepts here, I think, are still valid concepts. Some of them can be, as we know, modified and changed, but I think there's so much good stuff in this book. So anyway, almost 3 a.m. over here. I've got to sleep. If I wake up at 5 p.m. tomorrow like I did today, I'm going to be in deep trouble. And to those few brave who follow us, I salute you, wish you the best, and hopefully see you tomorrow. Thank you. Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.